The Adams case was a emergency room delay case, plain and simple.
The case is about a healthcare system that failed to treat Jessie Adams like a human.
Jessie Adams went in for an epidural steroid injection and it destroyed her life. It destroyed her husband's life. Things could not have gone worse for that family.
I went to my pain doctor in 2019 to get one of those shots in my back.
And almost as soon as she got off the table, she felt something. She felt numbness and more pain.
He nicked a blood vessel in my spine, and I had a huge bleed.
The feelings we had at first were almost like, what is going on? Puzzlement, why is this hurting when normally she would just be waking up and feeling a little numb and drowsy, and this time she woke up in pain. And so it's like, well, why is this going on?
Dr. Vu was assessing her as well as an anesthesiologist. Their solution, unfortunately, was to wait.
It got to be more concerning as time went on, because then she started to be, her legs were paralyzed. She couldn't move them anymore.
And ultimately they waited until right around 4:30, I think 4:28 p.m. So now she's been there for about 2 hours. She's exhibited symptoms that are neurological in nature for approximately an hour and a half. So they call the EMS finally. EMS arrives. She's unable to walk at this time. They put her on a gurney. They take her to the ambulance. They evaluate her. They take her to Flower Mound Presbyterian, where she arrives just before 5 o'clock. Now, to the credit of the Flower Mound Presby ER team, they knew she was coming. They knew this was very serious. And so they evaluated her within minutes of being there. The ER physician, Randy O'Dedra, was there along with his nurse. His differential immediately was, this looks like an epidural hemorrhage, which, if you're unfamiliar with an epidural hemorrhage, that's a serious condition, because not only can it cause paralysis, but depending on the extent of it, it could cause death, right? So this is a situation where time is of the essence. Every second counts. By 5:04 p.m., Randy O'Dedra is charting that she needs to have an MRI scan to confirm the existence of an epidural hemorrhage. He enters an order into the system. So that stat order, meaning that needs to be done as soon as possible, is entered and seen by the MRI technician.
We went to the ER. The doctor prescribed an MRI stat, and which didn't happen for 2.5 hours.
What should have happened is someone should have gone down there and gotten her and taken her to the MRI tube, because we also know that the MRI tube was available around the same time that the stat order was entered. But instead what happens is the MRI technician, a woman who testified at the trial in this case, clocks out. Records obtained from the hospital show that she actually clocked out for about an hour. And despite the fact that she was on the clock, she was scheduled to work until 5:30 that evening, she clocks out. She doesn't go get her. So now, Jessie and Rich Adams are sitting in the emergency room with a stat order with a probable epidural hemorrhage. Everybody knows it's an emergency. And she sits there until 6:15.
Things weren't coming along. We were just wondering, why does everything have to take so long? I mean, they're supposed to have protocols in place for this. So why is it taking so long?
She waits for approximately an hour and 16 minutes with an MRI tube that's available, with an MRI technician who's available, for no good reason. 6:28, she's in the MRI tube. We know that because it's time-stamped on the MRI images. And according to the testimony of the MRI technician, she knew immediately when the first frame came in. She had a massive epidural hemorrhage. an epidural hemorrhage that extended over a big segment of the T-spine. What should have happened is she should have picked up the phone and immediately called Randy Odedra, who's the emergency room doctor that entered the stat order, but she didn't. She continued on with the procedure. She didn't call anybody. So now the procedure runs for an hour. Jessie Adams is sitting there with a massive epidural hemorrhage. Nobody's mobilizing to get an to get an operating suite ready. Nobody's calling a neurosurgeon or a spine surgeon to get ready. We're screwing around with more MRI imaging when we already know what's happening. Randy Odedra, upon hearing this news at 7:30, immediately gets on the phone and calls the spine surgeon who was on call. So he immediately does a U-turn, heads back. But he gets to the hospital in about 15 minutes. And the records reflect that he immediately went to Jessie and evaluated her and determined that she was going to need emergency surgery right away. Sometime before she has surgery, she loses her ability to control her bladder. So now it's 8 o'clock. She's been at the emergency room for 3 hours. They now know she's going to need surgery. They're mobilizing to have an operating room available and to have a team of people to assist to get that surgery underway. There is a hospital policy that required them, once an emergency surgery was slated or scheduled, that surgery is to commence within 1 hour, where it's scheduled at 8 o'clock and it was to begin at 9 o'clock. But they don't get her to the operating room until 10 o'clock, so they wasted more time.
I was in such pain from the hematoma that I was out of my mind in pain. And I thought at one point, I was going to die.
She's been there 5 hours. The surgery is without complication, but not surprisingly, she had serious deficits after that surgery was over.
If they'd have got on it right away and got me an MRI and got me into surgery, chances are I would be able to stand up on a walker or maybe not be incontinent. But they waited too long, way too long.
When we first got this file and I looked at the hospital medical records, there were two things that I could not explain. And the first was, why did it take so long to get this lady an MRI that the physicians decided she needed immediately upon arriving at the hospital? The second thing was, why did it take so long to get her to surgery once they knew what she had?
It wasn't until we took a few depositions that the story became a little bit more clear, but it was a story that the defendants wanted us to hear. But then we knew where to start digging, and as we did, we uncovered several critical documents like a time card, an audit trail, which when you piece those together, it really started to show the delays in treatment.
It's reasonable for you, for me, for anyone who goes to a hospital, especially a Texas Health Resources hospital, to expect that they're going to have procedures in place, they're going to have well-trained personnel. Those personnel are going to have the support that they need to get their job done. We just kept finding out things after things after things. The more we dug into the documents, the more we discovered the policies.
And the policy said that if you have an emergency surgery, it should be done within 1 hour. And it seems like that's the kind of thing that you should tell your surgery staff about if you're going to have that policy. And they had no idea that it existed.
And I think I counted something like 23 policies that were breached. You get 23 of them stacked up end to end. What it looks like is a hospital that's out of control, which is what our hospital expert said. He said these are giant red flags. And anyone that is in administration of this hospital would know you got a huge problem on your hands.
This hospital, they don't have their ducks in a row.
At some point, we finally realized, yes, this is going to trial. And so that made us nervous in the sense of having to go through it. But I wasn't really nervous knowing that they were on the front lines for us.
The way this case unfolded is probably like most of our cases, where we learned some information from document discovery. We do some depositions, learn more, learn what other documents we need to go get. We get those documents and they reveal a new picture. And then we take some more depositions. And it's kind of a process that built on itself. And so it was throughout the entire case, up until the very end of discovery, that we were piecing this together. And a lot of that was because the defendants were fighting to withhold this information. And so it took several months of us, banging on the door and filing motions and threatening to file motions before the defendants would come clean with what they knew and what they had.
You're going to hear a lot of talk about hospital policies and procedures in this case. Hospitals are required to have written policies and procedures. If you want to participate in Medicare and Medicaid as a hospital, you must have written policies and procedures, and they must govern the care delivered in your facility.
So we had taken a number of key depositions in the case, including the MRI technician's deposition. Carr asked a lot of questions about what she was doing, when she did it, and she gave sworn testimony about that.
A lot of the hospital employees had greatly improved memories once we got to trial. Things that they couldn't explain or didn't remember that they remembered once they got on the witness stand. One of the most important witnesses in the case was the MRI technologist who clocked out. And I took her deposition and I cross-examined her at trial.
They weren't where they said they were. They weren't doing what they said they were doing. We actually pulled their records retention policy. And that records retention policy it was about 100 pages. And one of the lines in that policy was that they keep time cards for up to 5 years. And so knowing that, we took that record retention policy and said, per your policy that you keep these time cards, you need to produce Terry Tucker's time card, the technologist's time card.
And what the audit trail showed is that by 5:09, she's accessing the record and absolutely knew there was a stat order entered.
You testified that the study started at 6:31,
Okay.
correct? You testified that you saw what appeared to be an epidural hematoma within a few minutes of 6:31, correct?
Correct.
You testified that you believed the patient needed surgery when you saw that, right?
Yes.
And my question was, you knew that about an hour before Dr. Adedra did, if we can believe the medical record, that he was called at 7:30 p.m., correct?
Correct.
You don't remember picking up the phone and calling Dr. Adedra with that information, correct?
Correct.
You don't remember picking up the phone and calling the patient's ER nurse with that information, correct?
Correct.
I was surprised at how poorly the evidence went for the hospital in this case. This was a hospital providing emergency services, so we had to prove that they were consciously indifferent to a known serious risk, essentially. And that was a bar for our clients. There aren't that many cases that are tried involving emergency services because they're difficult cases to win. So it's an uphill road in Texas.
One of my mentors said that a jury trial is a race to credibility. And I felt like we grabbed it and never let it go throughout the whole trial. Like, our story was well organized, it made sense, it jibed with not just the testimony and the physical evidence, the records and the documents, but it made sense.
I want to go through, as my colleague was sitting here adding up the policy violations, I tabulated 26 breaches. 26. This isn't a third world country. This isn't a metroplex. This is right down the road that's happening.
What you heard in the courtroom is not normal. It is not normal for a hospital to have probably 20 breaches of policies and procedures. They matter. This isn't little stuff. This is stuff that matters. It's not normal.
Our life care plan expert obviously was critically important because he laid out what future care Jessie would need. He took her projected life expectancy based on the injuries that she has, and put together a life care plan over the next 8 to 10 years that laid out, surgery by surgery, procedure by procedure, appointment by appointment, the care that Mrs. Adams is likely to need.
You think about somebody like Jessie Adams, if she doesn't get redress from this, what's next for her? She needs this money to take care of her.
And what my clients are asking for is to hold this hospital accountable. Yes, there is evidence of this. This is the willful and wanton negligence question. These people knew that this was dangerous. You heard it from the witnesses. They knew, and they didn't do anything. They sat there. They didn't pick up the phone. They didn't follow their policy. They didn't get her to surgery. I'm tired of hearing about people saying, nobody said anything about it. Nobody complained. Yeah, I know. That's the point. That's the point. This hospital had become a place where people weren't saying, this isn't right. What's funny is, they're experts. So, yeah, I can't explain this. It takes longer than I would expect. Andy Duncan said, I can't explain it. You need to write yes on this. And we've given you the evidence to support why. It's there. What we are asking from you is for you to hold these people accountable. They're not here for some big payday. What they want is accountability. And I'm telling you right now, if you let the hospital hurt people and then you don't make them pay for it, what you're doing is you're incentivizing that.
The lawyers are they're impeccable. They've worked very hard for us over these last 4 years.
You always hope that when a verdict comes in, if it's publicized, that someone in a level of authority at this healthcare institution or another one will pay some mind to it.
I wouldn't want anybody to go through this like I did, never. This whole thing could have been avoided. It could have been avoided.